The Nerd Academy podcast is released weekly at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, available on our website at www.thenerdacademypodcast.com and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find the Nerd Academy podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also help support the show by going to patreon.com/The Nerd Academy podcast, where every donation allows us to bring you more exciting content every week.
Good morning, class, and welcome back to the Nerd Academy podcast, your source for nerddom news and commentary. I'm your host, Jarod Bachman-Stubbs, and making a rare TNAP appearance is Spencer Simpson.
Well, this is a very, very, very special occasion. Whenever Jarod said that we'd be having this particular guest on the show, I said, don't. Like it's about his schedule primarily, but if I'm not on this episode, I'm going to be really mad because I really am so excited to talk about this topic and to pick his brain a little bit. Before we get into that, we've got a couple things to do up front, right?
Yeah, the usual.
Are we gonna? I'll leave you to do it.
Yeah. Well, you guys know before we get into the meat of things, we got a lovely word from our sponsors at SundaysBloodyMary.com. You guys know the drill by now. SundaysBloodyMary.com is the most badass Bloody Mary accoutrement in the galaxy. They got their 2-time award-winning spicy Caesar mix, my preferred flavor from them. They also have their mild and traditional mixes. If you don't like the spice or animal product, the traditional mix was what they originally had branded as their vegan mix, but they changed that very recently. They also have garnishes like their pickled dilly beans, okra, and asparagus. They got some cute merch with the t-shirts and their hats. And they have a limited edition super spicy mix coming out as well. I'm going to be getting some of that for myself. And you guys can get all the lovely products at SundaysBloodyMary.com for 10% off. You use code TNAP, TNAP at checkout. Like I say, you get 10% off your order and you help out your favorite nerds whilst you do it. But without any further ado, Spencer, you want to Vanna White this bad boy?
Yes.
We have the author and writer for the Wall Street Journal of Red Carpet. We have Mr. Erich Schwartzel here.
Hi, guys. Hi, how's it going?
We're very excited to have you on.
Really?
I put sizzle out for this happening back when the book actually came out. And I was like, my goal, I was like, okay, I'm going to marathon this book in a week, and then we're going to make it happen. And then, we weren't quite able to. And I'm glad there was a delay on getting to have you on because things have since transpired that I'm very excited to pick your brain about, namely things that apply directly to this podcast with some MCU tie-in, as well as just general box office entertainment news type stuff.
Yeah.
So this is very exciting stuff. Something very excited to get into. And then don't worry, guys. We'll go back to our regularly scheduled bullshittery after this episode. We did a very serious, the Nazis are invading fandom, and now we're going to talk about China and the box office. We'll get back to dick joke journalism very soon, I promise. But in the meantime, we have an actual journalist here. So, Erich, if you can tell the lovely people a bit about yourself and the book.
Yes, I'm happy to. Well, first of all, I'll say that I am here by virtue of birth. I was born in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, hometown to Jarod and Spencer. I've known both of these fine gentlemen for a very long time, majority of their lives, I think. I'm a writer at the Wall Street Journal. I cover the entertainment industry, so I cover the business behind everything that you cover here on this podcast. And I have this book that's been out for about 6 months called Red Carpet that's about China's influence on the entertainment industry. And the reason I'm so excited to be here, there are 2 reasons I'm so excited to be here. 3. 1 is I really like you guys. 2 is that China's influence on Hollywood really often means China's influence on the movies you're talking about most frequently, the big budget superhero films. And third, I have to say, if I can give Jarod a specific shout out here, is that while I was writing this book, I became an expert on China, but I never really became an expert on some specific corners of nerddom. And there were moments where I would send Jarod, whole paragraphs in which I'm describing Captain America's dance on the Slovakia Accords, just to make sure that everyone who knows everything about the Slovakia Accords was reading this book and thought I knew what I was talking about. So Jarod, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for being sort of my resident nerd fact checker on very specific elements of this book that I knew that if I got wrong, I'd lose all credibility with some readers.
And I am here to re-up my position to say it is the Sokovia Accords.
Oh, well, see,
a very fake country.
Proving your worth. Proving your worth. Thank you. Real-time fact checking here.
I know. Well, like I said, we're talking about something serious. So my familiarity with the MCU is pretty much my main cachet while we talk to, like I said, actual journalists. But yeah, no, it's a very fascinating thing. And I remember being very excited whenever you were reaching out, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And like seeing the nature of your questions, it made me very excited for the book itself. And yeah, like you were saying, just to kind of jump right in, China's influence on the global box office and specifically Hollywood is one that is very much like an invisible hand. And you are not, until you are primed to see it, you will not see it. And I know like in very, very few examples I think have ever really breached the mainstream. I know one that is brought up in the book and one that has come up in like nerd culture conversation spaces. I think would likely be like the most infamous example was the debacle with the international, or specifically the Chinese version of the Force Awakens poster, where Finn is like this big at the bottom corner as opposed to basically being as large as Rey and Kylo Ren and Han.
Yeah, and Chewbacca was eliminated altogether, and Oscar Isaac was also reduced. So people and creatures of color all kind of dramatically demoted there.
Yeah. Nobody saw the Wookiee discrimination coming. I think that was more out
caught
of
us all by surprise.
Everybody, like.
And I have to say, not only was the topic of this study really fascinating to me, but I think I represent probably your average reader, because although I've seen movies pretty much my whole life, I have some familiarity with what goes on behind the scenes in the film industry because we cover that kind of stuff in the show from time to time. But I think myself, along with probably a lot of our listeners, a lot of your readers, kind of forget that movies are made somewhere other than Hollywood. Like we as Americans have like very global blinders on when it comes to film, when it comes to even the literary genres as well, where we think like American stuff is the only stuff to see. And I think in part that gets into language barrier. Not very many Americans are bilingual, unless in many cases they were raised in a bilingual home or English isn't their first language to begin with. And I think that has had something to do with it, but also the dominance of some of these larger industry titans like the MCU, like Star Wars, stuff like that, that is definitely American based and makes lots of money in America and elsewhere. But I really loved in the later part of your book, as you started to describe the growth in the Chinese film industry as well, their filmmaking projects. But particularly, it never even occurred to me that as American films are being shown around the world, there might need to be alterations, first of all. And second of all, that they might preemptively start to make those alterations. And I'm getting into, I'm kind of stealing your thunder just a little bit to kind of set up where we're coming from. But the more I started reading, the more I got into the book, the more often I started seeing examples of this. It was like, once you know that it's happening, you see it everywhere. And so, Erich, I would like to, at this point, invite you to give us your spiel. Tell us a little bit about the premise of the book, how you came onto this topic, your process in researching it and writing it. Really, you've got the floor, sir. Anything you'd like to share, please do.
Well, I think you set it up very well, because I know, Spencer, you're a historian here. So I think I'll start with some history, which you alluded to here, which is that, when Hollywood was founded more than 100 years ago, one thing that I was kind of surprised to learn was that it very quickly became a global industry. And America was late to filmmaking. European capitals in Italy and Germany, they were more advanced in the early 20th century when Hollywood started coming into focus. But then when World War I broke out, fighting across the European continent allowed America to catch up dramatically. And for all sorts of cultural reasons, one of which was that we were a country then of very different kinds of people coming together. There was not exactly a homogenous culture making these movies. It very quickly became apparent that American movies had an overseas appeal. So movies back as early as the 20s and 30s were being shipped overseas. And so by the time, I mean, let's use this as an example. By the time we get to 1977 with Star Wars, major American blockbusters are making sometimes a majority of their revenue from overseas audiences. And this becomes more and more the case as the movies get bigger and bigger. So the superhero moment we're in right now is fueled in large part by the fact that these movies can sell tickets everywhere, that they are made in America, but really much more global products. They're almost like iPhones in that way, right? iPhones are made by an American company, but they're also a very global product with a prioritization that is global, not just domestic. That all though happened without China. China was the dark side of the moon for much of the 20th century when it came to American business, because after the communist revolution there, American movies and Western influence was seen as the thing to avoid. And Mao Zedong and the Communist Party held up Hollywood as exactly what was wrong with the rest of the world, not was what was right about it. So in the 1990s, when American movies started flowing into China for the first time, it was this brand new market. It was the first really new market in almost 100 years that the industry had. And it didn't take long as China's middle class started to grow for the population to exert a massive market influence over Hollywood. And so by the time we have the early 2000s, up until like maybe 2008, 2009, the Chinese market goes from being non-existent to a financial salvation. And the Chinese box office starts to grow at a very quick clip. And it's clear from maybe 2010, 2011, that it will eventually be the number one box office in the world. And there are all sorts of economic reasons in the US and in China that are making that the case. In the US, the business is contracting and ticket sales are flatlining. Whereas in China, at one point, they were building 27 new screens a day. So it doesn't exactly take a business genius to see this is where the growth is. Now, what makes this interesting and particularly really thorny is that this is not like shipping movies to Italy or to Brazil. You're shipping movies into a communist system that has an intense level of censorship. And so studios in Hollywood, whether you're Disney or Warner Brothers or Universal or Paramount, they quickly learned that in order to access all of that revenue that had appeared overnight, they're going to have to follow certain rules. And that's where you have this confluence of commercial considerations running into political concerns. And that's why, as a journalist, it's a really rich story, because it gets very complicated very fast. And I came to this story around 2014 when I started covering it for the Wall Street Journal. And it seemed like a lot of people in Hollywood thought that this was China's opportunity to be what they call dumb money, which is money that comes into Hollywood, tries to meet a movie star or two, and then leaves with its tail between its legs. But it was clear to me that there were political concerns, political considerations fueling a lot of China's interest in the American entertainment system. And ultimately, that what China wanted to do was replicate America's success, winning the hearts and minds that America had won during the 20th century. And so it seemed like a way to write a book that was not only about something happening in real time, but also took this often confusing and overwhelming topic, which is US-China relations, and put it in a world that everyone understands, which is the movies. We all go to the movies. We all see a lot of the movies that I write about in this book. And so what I wanted to do was use the movies as a way to explain the broader geopolitical story happening over the past 20 years, and I would argue over the next 100.
Yeah, everything you said, like it's anybody who is like minded towards trying to keep up with entertainment journalism. I don't understand how this is not like an immediate like shoot to the top of your radar.
And I
prospect.
think in defense of like myself as a self-appointed representative of the casual viewer, casual listener, this is a relatively new, I don't know what word to use, phenomenon, I guess. Like it hasn't entered our range of view because, like you said, the first movies into China were in the 90s. That's whenever the Hollywood door into China really opened, and it's really taken off quickly since then. As you really well you outline really well in your book, like this is picking up a lot of speed really quickly, and so this kind of you're right. It was a ripe story to cover because it is this perfect convergence of commercial industry, political ideology, and entertainment, like the cultural psyche of two, in many ways, very opposite parts of the world. It is really just like the juicy steak story that I think everybody in any field hopes they encounter at some point in their career, like this really incredible discovery, this really incredible field to dive into and master and to write about and to bring forward to the attention of people like me, people like us, and around the world. Like this is an awesome story, and you write it really well. You cover it really well. I found your detail in the research really interesting as well. Like it's like characters that you would never have heard their name otherwise. You know, people.
Or unless you're like us and you're like, oh, Kathleen Kennedy. You know, like
but even people like deeper in the organization that you've like you've gone to that level of depth in order to cultivate detail and factual basis for this book. It's like people that were in and out of the industry, retired since. Like you really did your research, and it shows.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, absolutely. It's one lesson you learn while writing a book is that oftentimes it is the names you don't know who can be the best tour guides for various stories. And I often say that I think you're right that the casual moviegoer often isn't clocking China's influence, but I do think this book does quite an effective job of ruining moviegoing for a lot of people, because when you do start to notice it, you see it everywhere. And I think there was a time where, you know, there was an X-Men movie that did this, there was a Transformers movie that did this, where there was a lot of casting decisions being made, where Chinese actors and actresses were being put in movies to try and appeal to audiences there. Now it's more common that anytime really you see someone use their phone and they use a messaging app, chances are, if it looks like a generic messaging app, it's not like iMessage or something you recognize, chances are it's a Chinese platform that has paid for that product placement. There's all kinds of like little details like that you'll start to notice that are ways not only maybe just to appeal to the Chinese audience, but also just to make a little bit of cash, because the American movie is still the best commercial you can ever ask for. And so if you're a Chinese firm that's trying to get your energy drink into an American movie, you can really you can look no further for that kind of penetration. But what I was particularly interested in was what were the Chinese authorities doing when it came to Hollywood messaging, and what was happening to Hollywood scripts? What was happening to Hollywood edits and censorship and self-censorship to make sure that the Chinese market would remain, accessible?
Yeah.
Well, and if you want to get into some of that, because my favorite tidbit from the entire book that it was slow at the bar, and I'm literally pacing listening to this segment because, like I said, I
Wow.
listened to the audio version where I was so enraptured. Wolf Warrior, right? Right?
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this. I'm like, oh, so they got their own like Captain America. That's neat. The Russo brothers gave script notes.
Oh,
Friggin'
yeah.
Crossbones plays the villain. Like
Yeah.
that was the moment that I like my jaw hit the floor. I was
All right, let's get into it.
I don't
Let's get
know.
into it.
I don't even know if unnerved is the right word, but like knowing like
It's
being
just
the diehard
Yeah.
for like the Russo MCU movies, like loving Infinity War, Endgame, and Civil War, like those three movies definitely being in my top 10 MCU movies. Like I like when the Russos do the MCU,
Yeah.
barring some like color choices with Civil War, but that's neither here nor there. Like I was that just floored me the way that they were like, oh, obviously we have the guys who make Captain America cool.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
we have them help us make our own like Cap insert. And who do we cast as the villain? Use the B villain from Civil War and Winter Soldier. Just throw him in there.
He came at the Russo brothers' recommendation.
Yeah.
They suggested they hire Frank Grillo, and
to be fair, he's the perfect guy for pretty much any action movie villain you can think of.
Yeah, I can't say they're wrong.
Right.
Like, yeah, I mean, Frank Grillo kicks ass as that kind of like generic baddie, you know, like again, like a Crossbones type. But yeah, that whole like listening to the plot synopsis, I was, like I said, just absolutely riveted by that whole thing, and knowing that the Russos had their fingers in it. Like, how many people don't know that? Like,
and to be honest, Jared, I mean that is partly by design because the Russos don't want people to know that they were involved in it. Basically the creation of Wolf Warrior 2, which until very recently was the highest grossing movie in Chinese history, and for those who haven't picked it up yet, although I did once see it for sale at the Latrobe Walmart, so it is like. It is available there.
Someone get Travis on the horn. He'll bring us another copy.
Yeah, one of our other co-hosts is a McDonald Walmart employee. Yeah, getting my anyway.
Might still be for sale there. But I don't know how many copies they moved at that location, to be honest. But Wolf Warrior 2, which is I think the shorthand that a lot of listeners will know is that it's kind of like China's Rambo, right? It's about a lone wolf soldier who goes to this anonymous African village and saves the day and kills the bad guy. The only difference being that it's a Chinese hero and the bad guy is an American, and the entire movie is a thinly veiled metaphor for China's dominance over the US. And it's as far as Chinese action movies go, it was hugely successful in part because it was much more sophisticated than previous Chinese action films were. It had better fight choreography, it had better sound design, it had all of those elements that I always say, like, we notice when they're bad, but we don't notice when they're good. And this was because, as you said, Jared, the director of Wolf Warrior 2 got in touch with the Russo brothers, visited them, and had a meeting at the Disney lot. I believe the Russo brothers were in edits on an MCU movie at the time, and basically asked them, who do I hire for all that, what they call below the line talent? Who do I hire for the sound design, for the fight choreography, as you said, for the villain? And the Russo brothers essentially, they came on as essentially executive producers of the film, but then they asked that their names be removed from the credits because they were worried, probably rightfully, about being associated with a movie that was so blatantly anti-American when it came out. But no, nonetheless, their fingerprints are on it, and you can see the skill that they lent it. And so I don't think that would happen again. But it's interesting. I mean, the Russo brothers I mean, the work that we know them best for, Avengers Endgame, soon after would become the highest grossing Hollywood film in Chinese history. It is so the Russos for a time were executive producing in, essentially the highest grossing Chinese movie of all time.
Ghost producing,
and
Ghost
the highest
producing,
gross
well
is-
said, ghost producing,
Yeah.
and directing the highest grossing Hollywood movie of all time.
Yeah. So they were the kind of the kings of the market. Like
Yeah.
they came, they saw, they conquered from all directions.
Well, and when you were speaking, I Googled it when you said if they were in the edit on an MCU flick. Wolf Warrior came out in 2017. So most likely they were like rapping on Infinity War.
Yeah.
While they were like, oh yeah, this is gonna be your Winter Soldier. Like that, like I said, that whole passage, I hesitate to say favorite part because it kind of freaked me out on some weird level. I was like, this is kind of ghoulish, with especially that you keep her name off the credit. Don't, it's on the house.
Well, but if you think about, but the MCU really timed the Chinese market perfectly, because Iron Man comes out in 2008, and in the book I identify 2008 as this like critical year, because that is the year that the American box office starts to stagnate. It is also the year where we see DVD sales really take a hit. I mean, this is kind of insane to remember, but like the era of physical media was not that long ago, and those DVD sales really kept the lights on at a lot of studios. And at the same time, you had the Summer Olympics in Beijing kind of announcing to the world that China had ambitions that we didn't always associate with that country. And so 2008 is this moment where, because of DVD sales, because of ticket sales in the US, Hollywood is very vulnerable and China is very aspirational. And that's the year Iron Man comes out. And so you have a lot of Chinese moviegoers, many of whom are going to the theaters for the first time, starting with Iron Man, and they're sort of immediately ushered into the MCU.
Yeah.
You have, by contrast, you have this huge problem with Star Wars, because the original Star Wars and even the prequels came out before the Chinese film industry or the movie theater industry there was really developed. And as I said, in the 70s and 80s, they weren't getting any Hollywood movies at all, really. And so when The Force Awakens comes out in 2016, all of these Chinese moviegoers who go to see it are just confused as hell. Like, they have no idea none of the nostalgia played in China because they didn't have any familiarity with the original films. And to that end, they thought that this supposed future universe looked more rudimentary than their life in contemporary China. They were like, my smartphone does more than any of those gadgets, right?
Yeah.
And it's all and Lucasfilm is trying desperately to crack that market because it's still too big to give up on. But there's just been time and again failure after failure to get any interest. Whereas the MCU has been incredibly successful. I mean, one major blockbuster after another over there.
Well, we're on the topic of the MCU, and this is one of the things that again was kind of serendipitous of, we're coming to this conversation a little later than we originally planned.
But it turns out to be perfect.
We are recording this at August 1st. And if my memory serves me correctly, there's not been a Marvel movie to get into China since Endgame, if I'm not mistaken. It's like either Endgame or Far From Home were the last real MCU entries that got play in China. I know Multiverse of Madness didn't. I know Eternals didn't.
What was Black Widow the first one after Endgame?
It was the first one after the Spider-Man one that came immediately after Endgame. So
Got it.
ostensibly,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. It's been a long time.
So how is that? Again, asking out, like, this is stuff that is beyond the book, but with your expertise, like, how has that been affecting, do you think, the bottom line of Marvel Studios, but more importantly, like, that kind of machine that China built with this like MCU movie pipeline? Because like what you're describing with the general movie going audience in China with Iron Man in 2008 is virtually the story we've heard from almost every single filmmaker ever on the record who grew up in the 70s and 80s about Star Wars, where it was like, oh, the first movie I remember seeing is the first Star Wars, and then I saw Empire, and then I saw Jedi, and that's when I knew I wanted to be a director, and that's when I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I'm just curious to see if we see that same effect in its own way play out in China, that like in 15, 20 years, we have this like whole class of filmmakers who like their point of reference is an Iron Man, is a Cap, is a Black Panther or whatever, because like that's like they came up like even adults after they finally having access to film. But sidebar there, what do you think is going to come of the kind of weird game of chicken happening? Because they haven't had an MCU movie, and again, like we're going on 3 years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, and it's spread to other Disney releases too. There have been a lot. Lightyear and some others that have come out in the same time. Yeah. So look, it seems like for whatever reason, Disney is in the doghouse, and the officials at the Ministry of Propaganda in Beijing who approve releases have just not let any of these titles that you mentioned in Black Widow, Multiverse, Eternals.
I know Shang-Chi was the big one because it was like
totally.
And which Chinese American, because he's a Chinese American. That was that weird.
I was gonna say it seems like the perfect MCU flick to crack to really break through in China, but it doesn't even make it through the censors. Which
and there's no question that Shang-Chi was chosen for a standalone film because of its potential appeal in China. But this is the problem, is like there are no guarantees to doing business there. So you can put a movie like Shang-Chi into development, spend $200 million making it, and then the entire business premise you've based that film on falls apart because the officials in China decide they don't want to show it. Now, the thing that can make this really hard for people to do business there and for people like me to report on is that there's not like a memo that comes out from Beijing saying this is why we've rejected your movie. So we have to read the tea leaves quite a bit, and for the tea leaves on each one is actually pretty interesting. So like Black Widow, you remember, was postponed because of COVID and then released during the summer, and simultaneously released on Disney Plus when it came out. Well, when it was postponed to the summer, it put the movie in this like kind of critical week of movie going in China that is very popular, and that the authorities tend to keep American films out of to support their own releases. So that could have explained that issue, right? The Eternals was directed by Chloe Zhao, who about a year earlier had gotten into some hot water, particularly with people on Chinese social media, for comments she had made that were critical of China a decade ago. And Chinese memories are long, and any comments that are deemed critical of the regime or not in favor of China or the CCP often can put actors and directors in hot water. So Chloe Zhao has been kind of persona non grata there since those comments emerged. Simu Liu, the star of Shang-Chi, had similar issues with comments that he had made, again, years before he was as famous as he is now. And there have also been questions about whether or not Chinese authorities want to see Western companies and businesses appropriate their stories in movies like Shang-Chi. So like for each individual film, we can kind of look and say, well, that could have been the reason why. There could be reasons we don't know about, of course, but each of those is plausible.
Well, I wanted to add, I mean, with what you were going with, whenever I believe it was when the Suicide Squad was coming out, I believe John Cena said something about Taiwan, and then like he had to like walk that statement back because WB like had like the giant peacemaker gun to his head and was like, "You take that back right now because we need this released in China."
Yeah.
But like with movies like Eternals and like Multiverse of Madness that have very prominent queer representation, Lightyear as well, but again, mostly on the topic of the MCU. Do you think that was a factor? Because
I was thinking
like
the same thing.
Fastos is married to a dude, and
because
America Chavez has two moms, and she's canonically queer as well.
as you cover in your book, it like the Chinese censors in Beijing are very conservative in a world where Hollywood is like increasingly progressive.
Yeah.
Do you think that has a heavy-handed force in the number of Disney movies getting scaled back as we see more and more non-binary individuals, LGBTQ plus individuals in the movies, not just in the background, but more and more taking center stage?
It's harder than like the blink and you miss it lesbian kiss and the Rise of Skywalker. And now
we've got a main character in Multiverse of Madness who comes from lesbian parents. Like, how much of a factor do you think that specifically plays in the pullback of Disney films being released in China?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the track record is mixed. There have been examples. I'll take this outside the MCU. I mean, there have been examples of some like really egregious censorship done. I mean, the best example I can give you is it's in the book. It's Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie about Queen, and that movie was criticized in the US for already kind of sanitizing Freddie Mercury's homosexuality. But when it was released in China, I mean, the guy went like deep into the closet. And so they removed all references to his gay relationships. And at the end of the film, when he reveals that he has AIDS, in some theaters, the sound just went out. So no one in the theater could hear what he was saying. Now, when it comes to the MCU, the track record, I mean, it's hard to say because you remember when Endgame came out and one of the Russo brothers has a cameo
as a gay guy,
as a gay guy in the
support group,
survivors group, and he's talking about his partner who had what's the verb they use? Blipped. Thank you. I was gonna say dusted.
I mean, you'd still be right.
Yeah.
That was what the fans kept saying pre having the word blip. But
So I remember whenever that came out, I actually asked a colleague of mine in Beijing to go see the movie and tell me if they had kept that scene in, and they had. I mean, some of the examples that you're citing, Spencer, like they're deeper. They're more threaded into the actual film. So it's hard to say. I mean, sometimes it can be as easy as cutting the relevant material or trying to scale it back. But it is this like central tension right now because American audiences are calling for more of that kind of representation on screen, and this massive foreign market, as you said, plays it very conservatively. And so I don't know of a world where we see characters come even more into the center of the frame, right? I mean, I think this and this is interesting. I'm sure you two are picking up on this too. Like, I feel like I'm detecting a lot of frustration with the blink and you miss it treatment that a
Absolutely.
lot of these characters are receiving, and that a lot of audiences, even those sympathetic or even requesting this kind of representation, are almost kind of viewing it as like pandering,
Yeah.
or almost having an attitude that's like, you know what, don't even bother.
Yeah.
Say it with your chest, or don't say it at all.
Which
Yeah.
is interesting, because as you explore a bit in your book, Chinese audiences are having increasingly a similar attitude toward Chinese cameos and like the small details that the studios are throwing just to appeal to the audience. And you mentioned toward the end, I'm just thinking, aren't they going to pick up on this? And you mentioned, they're like, yeah, we are picking up on this, and like it's not working anymore.
Stop showing me like the 10-cent WhatsApp clone.
Yeah, it's not working anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't have come as a surprise, right? Like Chinese audiences are savvy audiences, and they can see through pandering as well as anyone. So when a Chinese actress is cast in an X-Men movie, they very quickly start calling her a flower vase because she's so useless in the film. I think you're right, and also kind of, I mean, I was fascinated whenever I would go over to China and I would ask people what did they think of these movies that they were watching, and they would say things like, "Well, I thought it was pretty good for a propaganda film." Like there was even this acknowledgement of knowing what the government wanted them to receive, and being able to kind of receive it with that filter. And so it's interesting, going to the movies in China is this fascinating experience, because in many ways it looks and feels like going to the movies in the US, but there's a how before you see a preview, it has like the disclaimer from the MPAA, well, before you see any movie in China, they have this green screen that goes up with a dragon on it. That's the seal from the Ministry of Propaganda saying this film has been approved for distribution by the ministry. And there's a trumpet blare that goes out whenever it appears on screen. and they do this with every movie. So
that's every trailer. So like go to see Nope right now. And
they're not showing Nope.
I know, yeah. I thought of the
Nope.
first movie, but
definitely not showing Nope. But Jarod, I saw it. I like heard the trumpet blare before watching Toy Story 4.
But that's
the
for
following
the movie,
story
not each
about
trailer.
Yeah.
No, it's not before each trailer. It's before each movie. Like
I heard that as like at the beginning of every trailer. Like,
you watch, your half hour of previews. You hear it a half dozen times.
Yeah.
Okay,
totally.
Before the movie. Okay, that makes more sense, and is arguably funnier than each trailer. Okay, I misunderstood that.
But this, to bring it back, this, you really have an interesting tension developing between in capitalism, really, because in America, like I said earlier, we have these like cultural global blinders on. It's like it's about me. We want movies and stories about us. We want us to be represented, as is really truly the case. And so you have, in a very capitalist way, the American audience is saying, we want stories that we can relate to. That includes representation of minority groups and so forth. And yet on that opposite side of capitalism in America, you've got that, okay, but if you want any more movies, like we have to be able to sell to an audience that is very, very different than you are.
Yeah.
And that we need to take strides to preemptively censor these movies to ensure that they ever make it into the view of the Chinese audiences. So you have like this really weird, tense, double-edged sword of capitalism when it comes to the movie industry. And on both sides, both in Chinese filmmaking and in American filmmaking, you have this desire to A, make money, but also B, make stories that your primary audience,
different audiences happy with.
Yeah. And like you also mentioned later in the book, the Chinese filmmaking industry is now globalizing. You have chapters and pictures in the book that just blew my mind, where there are villages in Africa, isolated villages in Africa, watching Chinese made films on, they've got like the antenna, and you bend them the right way. You got the tin foil on the top of it. These like real backwater developing countries, these small villages that are having Chinese movies streamed in to their houses. And it's like, it was so crazy to me when reading like how central that is to everyday life, like the amount of time spent. And it blew my mind, because I never thought about Africa and some of these other developing countries in that way, where like if the TV goes out, they're like, oh crap, what the heck am I supposed to do now?
Yeah,
that seems like a very American mindset, that once the cable goes out, like what is there left to do? But it seemed like they spend hours and hours a day watching some of these Chinese flicks on their little televisions with their Chinese state-sponsored satellite dishes. And what were they, like bright orange or something like that? Just
like they actually there was the orange of your logo here, actually. Very similar. So what you're describing is this program.
Eric, you're giving away the game.
Those are actually Nerd Academy satellites. They're only get our episode.
You went in a completely different direction. I was going to say we were sponsored by the CCP.
Yeah. I like the idea. I like the idea of the residents of Suswa, Kenya, just watching hours and hours of Nerd Academy podcasts.
There's just some kid in Suswa that's just like making cookie cop jokes all the time.
So, but it's a great point, because so when I was working on this book, like people would say to me, people who work in Hollywood, they would say like, China's efforts are never going to succeed because American audiences are never going to go see Chinese movies. I was joking before.
True.
Yeah, it's true.
I've never seen a Chinese made movie in my life.
No one, I was joking, but like no one is buying that DVD of Wolf Warrior 2 in Pennsylvania.
I really want to now. Yeah. I have to know, where does one find Wolf Warrior 2?
I actually did. So just to bring that back, when I saw that for sale, I did actually contact the studio that was releasing it. And I was like, why is this for sale in my hometown Walmart? And it was like there is this effort to essentially try and sell DVDs of Chinese action movies. The model they're trying to follow is Kung Fu, right? Like maybe we can try to hook people who would have been interested in Kung Fu 20 years ago. Side note, but the Africa chapter though was inspired by that same question, because I thought, well, that might be true that Americans aren't going to go see Chinese movies, but there's a big world out there, and we can look elsewhere. And Africa is actually where a lot of the distribution efforts are really happening underway, and it's mainly through these satellite dishes you referenced that are subsidized by the Chinese government and carry Chinese entertainment on them. And so when I would walk into these apartments, I would walk in on a weekday afternoon and unannounced just find everyone watching Chinese soap operas or one night we watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Chinese Kung Fu was very popular. And it was a compliment to all of the investment happening outside their apartments as well, right? There are Chinese-built train stations and Chinese-built roads and highways, all of this infrastructure being developed, and the entertainment was kind of introducing them to the country, building that for them.
Yeah.
It
really does. Like, I didn't get the global battle for cultural supremacy part of the title until that chapter in the book about watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in this small community in Africa. And it really does bring a lot of the global expansion, both in terms of, like you were saying, infrastructure and trade and commerce, but also cultural entertainment. It really does. Like, it is very imperialistic in its approach, but to be fair,
it's like a soft power. It's like,
yes,
it's the same.
Yes,
it is the same, like aggressive, like colonialism of old, but they're executing it solely in soft power,
which like so hypocritical for us to be like, because we're Americans. America is like, I mean, it's being challenged at the moment, but we're kind of like the kings of soft power, globalizing. cultural dominance.
Not even talking that like that kind of soft power, but like stuff like, okay, we're gonna build a bunch of bridges and roads and towns, and here's a bunch of entertainment.
Yeah,
like that is that has so many ramifications for the future that like we can't even begin to speculate on.
So this is exactly this is sort of exactly the note I wanted to end the book on, and I love to hear you talk about that, because you're right. Like there's a playbook that China is using that America wrote, right?
Like, wait, I know what you're doing. Stop that. Yeah. And that's kind of like, if you clued in, that's the attitude that we're kind of having. Like, I see what you're doing, and I don't like it, but that's exactly what we do. So go ahead. Sorry, Erich.
No, it's okay. There is a playbook here. I think the question that I want to raise is like that they're not identical, and the core difference is the values that are being supported and inculcated through this outreach, right? And so you can imagine a world where China controls the screens is a world where certain people feel very differently about themselves, where certain narratives and messages aren't allowed to even really be considered. And so you're right. The playbook is ours, but the content is very different.
Which is, I think, maybe why it feels so, for lack of a better word, icky, and like it does feel challenging. Like we're being because you're right, the playbook is ours, but the content isn't, and so it's like it feels like a wolf in sheep's clothing to the American viewer, because you're like,
also
wait a
that
minute.
element where like you want to criticize tactics, and you go,
we
did it too.
But yeah, which is whenever
depending on like depending on your flavor of person, there's going to be varying degrees of willingness to critique the tactic,
right. But and that was like the first time I picked up this book. My mom had pre-ordered it. I didn't get my copy until it was my birthday. But I remember I flipped through just to get a feel for the chapters and stuff, and then we hit this couple pages in the middle with the pictures, and right up here is that it? Yeah, there's the movie poster for Wolf Warrior 2, and I'm reading. It says the movie starred Wu Jing as a Chinese soldier who saves the African villagers from violent, racist American mercenaries, and that just like the first moment that I, in my like ignorance, even imagined that anywhere in the world, Americans are the villains in our movies. And it's like, oh man, I really need to read this book, because if we're at a point where in homes in Africa and in other less developed countries where China is really asserting its industrial and cultural influence through these outreach programs. I forget the name of the initiative, Erich. The
satellite dish program is the 10,000 Villages project, because they're going to 10,000 villages.
In the world be about. But yeah, I'm and I opened this up and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this goes where what sounded like an interesting case study quickly, as I'm reading it, became like, this is one of the most important books anyone right now could be reading. I can think of one, and I'm not just saying that to flatter you on it. I can think of one that I've in my life as important to read right now as this. And like I said up top, after reading, and as I'm reading and examples, like waiting to ask newest Minion movie, like is he?
Oh, we have a
sorry, I cut out. You cut out there with the newest Minion movie. What about it?
Yeah. Have you seen that one or heard anything about it?
No, I haven't seen it. I actually have to go. I have to go see it for a story I want to do, but I haven't seen it yet.
You're definitely going to want to see it. I saw this movie, no joke, like the day after I finished this book.
I told you
And
I ruined movies for you. This is great.
I know. Well, this is the first and very best example. And I'm like looking at my friends. I'm like, guys, do you know what this means? And they're like, no. I'm like, but do you know what this means? The entire plot for
Is this when you went to that wedding? Did you go with a bunch of
no,
dudes
no,
in
no,
suits
no,
to
no,
this
no,
movie?
no, no.
I was about to hit you right now, if you were
No.
like, "Oh, I wore a suit to go see me."
So in this movie, like it didn't phase me until halfway through. But like the plot of this movie is centered around like they have to take this amulet to like the big festival in Beijing for the Chinese New Year, and that's when like this stuff is gonna happen. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, look at that. And halfway through the movie, okay, this is when I'm like, oh my gosh, it's happening. Halfway through the movie, two of the minions get separated from the rest of the group, and they're kind of wandering aimlessly through the world, and they stumble upon this acupuncture shop.
Oh my god!
And this lady running at this random lady who I was telling Jared looks like she's of like Latina Hispanic origin. Like she does not look as though she would have any authority on acupuncture from any kind of like ancestral background, but she owns this and runs this acupuncture shop and kind of takes in these two stray minions and teaches them kung fu. There's like a 5-minute montage in the middle of this movie that sticks out like a sore thumb to me, and I'm like, no joke, I'm sitting there it was at a drive-in in Mount Pleasant. I'm sitting there at the drive-in movie theater. I'm like,
Pepe Sylvia.
it is happening. I was like, Erich was not like blowing smoke up our butts. He's not like trying to make us see like weird spirits all over the place. Like, he's not out there to ruin movies just for the sport of it. Like it is actually happening. And I saw this movie like the week I finished the book, and it blew my mind. I was like, this is not like it's trickling in. You'll start to notice it in a couple years, in a decade or two. Like it is right now.
Fascinating. I've got to go see this. I mean, what you're describing is
textbook. It is textbook.
It is. And ironically, I don't know if that movie's been released in China yet. I know that the Minions are quite popular there. But that, I mean, it's what you're describing is textbook, right? Like sort of it's politically safe, right? They're not sending the minions into Tiananmen Square,
right?
but there's kind of like a cultural appreciation, that especially
and
Chinese parents would appreciate.
Yeah, and I'm like I said, I'm looking around. It was with a church group. I'm looking around. I'm like, does this feel weird to you guys? Like that there's just all of this, and of course I'm kind of like tongue in cheek prodding at him. Doesn't it seem a little weird to you that the whole point of this movie is we have to make it in time for Chinese New Year, and halfway through the movie this random lady shows up to teach the gang kung fu? Doesn't that seem a little odd to you? And they're like, well, I guess. And I'm like, you got to read the book, baby. It'll explain everything.
Wait till you hear about Kung Fu Panda. My God. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have to say though, I mean, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't know that was the plot of the movie. One thing, like sort of strategically as a journalist, like one thing that was great about this book and writing this book is that oftentimes like this Minions movie is a blockbuster. Like tons of people are going to see it.
Yeah.
But these are movies that are often just not really treated seriously as products.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's why when you told me about that a couple weeks ago, I'm sorry to cut you off, Eric. I was like, no shit, they did that in Minions. Because who the hell gives a damn about the little banana guy? You know?
Right.
Like
I mean, I felt very similarly. Like, I mean, like if you, I felt very similarly. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of reporting on the Transformers franchise for this book.
Yeah.
Felt very similarly, where I felt like it was this out of body experience, because I'm watching these films that are clearly being made with so much, really serving so many purposes for the CCP in them. And I knew that they were massively popular, but it didn't feel like anyone had raised the issue when they came out. but no, now I really got to go see
Yeah.
Minions.
And in your defense, Eric, this book, much like we were talking about Iron Man, is kind of like dropping at the very perfect moment where it's starting to be noticeable for people who just are casual moviegoers. Like, you spend your entire career reporting on this industry and where the money and the ideology meet. And so, of course, you're going to pick up on these kind of things. Of course, you're going to be in the perfect position to report on them. Whereas it's just now starting to circulate in the minds of average, casual moviegoers. And it's happening more and more often. And so you can't see every movie. Even I know that you report a lot on them, but you can't be expected to see everything. And if more and more movies are having this, then it's just like you can't see them all. But I opened my eyes and I'm like, holy cow, Eric was right.
Man, that is such a cool reader experience. I gotta say, I
couldn't have
that.
planned it better. And like we've been trying to get this together for months and months and months, but it was like perfect time, because if we didn't do it so late, I wouldn't have finished reading it probably. I wouldn't have been watching the new Minions movie as I had just finished the book. We wouldn't be able to report on the stuff,
MCU,
right?
just like
the MCU stuff right now is a hot
hell,
topic.
Even like, look at, I had it pulled up because like the very beginning of the book talks about Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
We're like a month out from Maverick's release, and it's clocking in at almost 1.3 billion at the box office. But this movie that like is the like sequel boot to this movie that is like this iconic piece of like both camp and like American propaganda.
Yeah.
Well said.
Like set up to be gangbusters in friggin' China.
Yeah.
To the point where we're like, oh, we got to take this pen off. We got to,
Yeah.
Like re-listening to it, because like I said, like I listened like the week it came out, I blasted through it, but like here, like re-listening with like the talk of Top Gun Maverick,
which got delayed several times,
still being in pre-production, and then was like just kind of like staring at the box office, like when is it safe for me to come out? Like it was very prescient.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised, Eric, if you wrote that section of red carpet in whenever we thought we were first going to get Maverick, before it got delayed, kind of waiting for the post-COVID box office rush to get back again. And so like
Maverick was in that class of like Black Widow, New Mutants, Batman, there's several others that, like, all we're just waiting, and it's
like you say, like waiting
game.
Is it safe to come out now?
And they became like Top Gun in particular became, because we knew that it had cost so much money and that Paramount had such high hopes for it, that became kind of the weather vane for the whole industry, and every time it got delayed, everyone else would follow. And so I probably wrote like 4 stories about Top Gun Maverick being delayed because of COVID.
If entertainment historians, I know you have to go, Eric, so we'll wrap up soon but like entertainment historians are going to look back on movies like Top Gun, like Spider-Man No Way Home, like those movies are going to be talked about as like the kind of like weird make or break moments for the box office globally. There's a reason why Happy Spider-Man Day, there's a reason why they're like re-releasing No Way Home next month with like 30 seconds extra footage. Like,
now, let me ask you though something. I mean, does that appeal? Will you go see it?
I probably will go see it, just because I've only seen it once. This was back in December. December release. I only saw it the one time in theaters, and given the tense relationship between Sony and Disney, it's not on Disney, nor does it look like it ever will be in the foreseeable future. And so it's kind of like, unless you catch it on TV with commercials, which, let's be honest, we just don't like commercials anymore. When you've got your Netflix and your Disney Plus and all these platforms that don't do commercials, it's just such an annoyance. Don't know why we didn't think of this sooner. Like how annoying, how much of our lives are wasted on commercials. Anyway, it's not on Disney Plus, and unless you go out and you buy the DVD, like you said, they took a huge nosedive around 2008 or so. Like the physical media, like you said, it's not selling hardly at all anymore. And so, like, for me personally, I've got no way to see it. I've got no way to see No Way Home. And so I would go back to see it just because I saw it the once, I loved it. And like most movies that are worth watching a second time, on the second viewing, you're kind of like reevaluating what you thought of it the first. Like, is this really as good of a movie as I thought it was? And if so, would I see it again? And so that's what I'm really, because as reviewers, we watch it, we kind of give our thoughts, but those are very fresh thoughts. You know, the emotions are still kicking in. It's the it's the movies that stand the test of time that really leave an imprint on not just us as individuals after the first viewing, but as a culture. And so rewatching it a bit removed from the original release has always been a priority for me. But an additional 30 seconds of footage, tell you the truth, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you which 30 seconds was the new footage.
You'll be able to. From what I understand, there's going to be like another scene with Matt Murdock and like more play with the other Spideys. I think that there was like a behind the scenes picture that made its rounds on the internet where like there was more of a dedicated like Tobey Spider-Man Green Goblin rematch.
Oh,
where like
where
like Tobey was like on the glider with Green Goblin, like throwing hands. So there's going to be more than 30 seconds. And me being like the utter, I mean, there's the one piece of Spider-Man art back here. There's another Spider-Man poster over there. Like
he's got Spidey's on his shirt.
I'm wearing the Spider-Man Rosenthal's right now. Like I think a more general answer to your question, Eric.
Mark. Personally, I won't go back to the theater for 30 seconds. I would go back to the theater, like with all of the Peter Jackson Middle Earth movies, like the extended cuts have substantial amounts of material in them. Like that's the kind of thing I'd go to see. But a re-release with a little bit of extra footage, most of the time I wouldn't bother with it. But because I haven't seen No Way Home a second time, then I definitely have my sights on that. But
like I said, I'm an easy mark. It's Spider-Man. I'm a simple man.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just always curious how these re-releases, which can sometimes feel like
hell, we don't even have a frame for it because I haven't been able to find a decent frame. The poster for the re-release of Endgame.
Oh yeah, which is absolutely gorgeous.
To beat Avatar. They only did this to beat Avatar. Like I just haven't found a good frame for this guy.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
You're absolutely.
They
Go ahead.
do that. And didn't they beat Avatar with that?
Did they beat Avatar with the re-release?
I think they did. And then Avatar beat them again.
Yeah. Did you hear that?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tete-a-tete where they surpassed Avatar and then Avatar came back because they re-released it.
But you're
Disney
absolutely
all love it, which makes it even dumber and funnier.
You're absolutely on the money though, Eric. Like, even to the committed fans that have a whole podcast about this kind of thing, it definitely does still feel like a cash grab, to re-release movies with a little bit of extra footage. Now, I'm willing to give them some leeway
to make up for Morbius tanking.
But I'm willing to give them some leeway in a post-COVID world where people are still kind of hesitant to go to a movie theater and sit in the same room with potentially sick people for 2 hours. Like I'll give them a little bit of leeway there, particularly with some of the movies that were released on Disney Plus right at like the Jungle Cruise and the Black Widow that really kind of did their stars dirty with the box office releases being low because it was released on Disney Plus as well.
Yeah.
Like,
and also in the theaters need the movies because the supply is still so low. What's interesting, you mentioned this. I mean, I had done some reporting earlier this year that when the Scarlett Johansson Black Widow lawsuit was causing all sorts of consternation here. That the Russo brothers were in negotiations with Disney to direct another movie, and that they had stopped negotiations because of the contract dispute.
Wow.
And now that they've announced Phase 6, there's been, I don't know this, but there's been speculation that they could have been in conversation for Secret Wars.
They very publicly were like, we'd only come back for Secret Wars. And I don't think it is an accident that of the 2 Avengers movies we're getting in Phase 6, only one of them has a director right now. And it's not Secret Wars. And I think
who would you want to direct Secret Wars?
The Russo brothers. But
I mean,
if they're not coming in, then
I mean, the Russos feel like an obvious choice, but
Yeah.
that's because they had. Part of that is because they had so much play with so many of the characters involved with Infinity War and Endgame. Like,
you can rely on the product that they would put out because of how much experience they have with the cast, but also with the
going into something like
stories.
Secret Wars, though, like most of our heroes are newbies.
Yeah.
Like most of our heroes are gonna be your, Kate Bishops and Shang-Chi and Moon Knight, like all of these new heads, all these young bloods who are becoming like the main characters now. That the Russos have less of a familiarity with. Like, I'm not super invested in the Russos getting theirs, and the fact that the Gray Man just got a sequel announced, I'm not confident that they'll be coming back for Secret Wars. I know the guy who directed Shang-Chi is attached to Avengers Kang Dynasty.
Right.
Which I am very excited to see how that pans out. But we talked about that at length in our last episode.
I'm sure you did. You did. But you guys are my my 2-man focus group, and so I have to squeeze a few.
Yeah,
of course.
I'm not sure who I'd like to see. If I were to go off of like who has been playing around in the MCU waters lately, I like Chloe Zhao a lot. I loved Eternals. I'm in that very vocal minority that thought Eternals was great.
I didn't like it.
Reporting. It's not going to be Chloe Zhao.
Oh, I know that's not going to happen. I'm like off the dome, like recent Marvel directors.
I didn't like Eternals, but I don't think it was Chloe's fault. Think that the script was too dense. They were trying to do too much in too little time with brand new characters. The directing choices were sound. The script was not. That's my opinion on Eternal. So I would love to see Chloe back for another MCU.
I'm not sure. I know. I just lost his name. Spider-Man director.
Oh.
How did I lose it? I was literally just about to say it.
We both lost it.
I know.
Sorry, Eric.
That's okay. No, I should know it too, actually. But
why are you giving me everybody who's directed Spider-Man except
Watts.
for John Watts?
John Watts. John Watts has done good stuff.
Watts.
I like John Watts
because he was supposed to do Fantastic Four, and then he backed out so that he could work on Star Wars Skeleton Crew. Like he's still keeping it in the Disney family, but like I don't know. There's a lot of options. It depends on somebody who could have like really have their finger on the pulse of like whatever our ensemble will look like come time for Secret Wars.
I would trust John Watts with the Secret Wars project. Generally speaking,
he did good with his multiverse movie with No Way Home. But yeah, I know we're coming up on time for you, Eric, and I know you have dog duties to deal with, namely avoiding dog duty. We're good reporters here. Eric, where can the lovely people find you and all that you do?
Well, my like I said, the book is called Red Carpet. It's available where all books are sold. And I thank you. That's the glorious cover.
Yeah.
I write.
Let me pull up my Audible.
Journal, and my all my social handles are the same. It's all Erich Schwartzel, all 15 letters of it. So you can find me anywhere there.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you again for coming on. We've been very, very, very excitedly looking forward to this. And
I have too. You two are like, I have to say, you're ideal readers in a way. You really are just like fantastic. I mean, like just really fantastic, fun responses to this book. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you for stopping by. I was gonna say if you want to sit around for the part I warned you for.
Well, I've been promised a show. I'm gonna watch it.
Well, let's get to the fun. Spencer, where can the lovely people find you?
The lovely people can find me not tearing it up on Twitter at SpenceMan49. Same place on Instagram. And Jarod, how about you, my friend?
You guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at DarkJedi2552, and you can find the Nerd Academy podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website, www.thenerdacademypodcast.com, where if you're feeling generous, you can donate to our Patreon.
Give me $1.
Speaking of our patrons, thank you to our $10 alumnus. You might want to turn down your headphones. Eric, Nick Johnson. Our latest $10 patron, Keandre Lloyd. The silhouette of that backflip is never not funny. And our most loyal $10 patron, Paco, or as he's going by on the Patreon now, Taylor Swift.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Just another day here at the Nerd Academy
we're numb to it.
podcast.
Every time we have a new person on, I go, damn, I forgot to warn him about the Alex Jones clip.
And Eric, just because I saw the confusion on your face with the give me a dollar guy, that is a cosplaying homeless man at the Renaissance Fair.
Yeah. Well, no. Let me, because that you made it sound much worse. It is a guy who is a Renaissance Fair actor.
Okay.
Who plays like a street bum.
With an accordion.
I don't know. Spencer would know this better than any of us, but I don't know exactly if the dollar is the currency he should be asking for then.
You're definitely right.
It's definitely not.
But I did give him $1 in exchange for being like, can I put this in my podcast for forever now?
Well, wait, you recorded that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Okay.
I doubled back. I doubled back, and my girlfriend was like, that'd be a really funny bumper to play for the Patreon. And I was like, oh shit, that'd be so funny.
Well done.
Yeah. For those of you who are my fellow Knowledge Fight listeners, Alex takes the stand tomorrow in the trial. That'll be fun. But thank you all so very much for watching and listening. Eric, thank you for stopping by. Also, student store link on the website for our TeePublic.
Sure, tpublic.com.
And there's so many clips, Eric. There's a good 24. I'm not all of them are designed for the end, but they're there for jokes. But yeah, thank you everybody for watching and listening. Go check out Red Carpet, and I'm gonna pull up one last time.
It's a cultural sensation. You will want this book.
Sweeping the nation.
Thank you.
And class dismissed.
Stop. Move away from the cookie jar.